Joining us now to discuss all of these issues is the associate editor of Chronicles, a magazine of American culture, Pedro Gonzalez. So, Pedro, thank you for being with us. I want to ask you first about Juneteenth, because I really do believe that it is a triumph worth celebrating, but I'm also keenly aware of what I think the left is going to try to do with Juneteenth, and that they're going to try to weaponize it and use it effectively as a hammer against white Americans. You have been pretty vocal, though, that you think the GOP has been fooled here and should have stood its ground against making it a holiday. Can you explain?
I think part of it is actually just the fooled part. There's more to it, but I'll start with it. The politicization has already happened. If you look at online search trends, Juneteenth for years has been of no interest to the vast majority of Americans. Not just that they weren't aware of it, they weren't interested in knowing what it was, just because they didn't know it existed. It actually wasn't until the week of the George Floyd riots that there was this exponential increase in searches for Juneteenth, because the left latched onto it as a kind of way to, like you said, use it as a symbol to discredit Independence Day as a fundamentally racist event, a day that excluded everyone else except for one group. So that already happened. And I think instinctively, a lot of Americans, specifically Republican voters, understand that symbolism, because the latest polling from late May, shows that only 7% of Republican voters wanted Juneteenth to be a federal holiday. But their party did it anyways, and then browbeat them into basically either you accept this and you accept what we're telling you, or what's implied is that you're racist. There's something wrong with you. You're an apologist for slavery. You're an apologist for this, basically for what the left is already accusing you of being. The GOP did that. They didn't need the Democratic Party's help. And independent of what well-meaning people like you and everyone else who understandably is focusing on the essence of Juneteenth, on this holiday as something that was good, the context of current events completely nullifies that, in the sense that the left is already using it as a battering ram against Independence Day, against the country. Democrats were very clear in their intentions during the floor debates about this bill. Republicans heard these debates. Democrats, from Rashida Tlaib to Linda Lawrence, said that Juneteenth will be an annual reminder, not of what we've overcome, but actually how much further we need to go. That every year it will serve as a reminder of how evil this country is, and a reminder that we still need to defund the police. We still need to empty out prisons. We still need to implement more race-based policies like affirmative action. So I think in a different light, maybe, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, finish your point there.
In a different light, I think Steve is onto something, that this could be a good thing, but just in the context of 2021, it's a mistake.
Well, I was surprised that so many Republicans are on board. There's not a lot that Democrats and Republicans can agree on these days, but a lot of them were on board. Why do you think that is?
Fear, for one, fear of being called a racist. Two, I think it's opportunistic. They see that, or they think that finally people will realize that Democrats are the real racists, and that line will finally pay off, and somehow that it will indemnify them from being, because I think a lot of them are deeply actually terrified of being seen as racist, because Republicans actually care a whole lot about what liberal media says about them. Although they say that that's not true, they really do actually care. So in other words, they care about what their enemies think. So that's part of it. Another part of it, I think, is that having this kind of layer of we're woke now, and look how dignified and enlightened we are, how by embracing the zeitgeist of anti-racism, which is funny because, like Steve pointed out, it's about actually specifically beating on white people. It distracts from the fact that the GOP has not fundamentally changed in terms of policy. And I think it's very interesting that in the same week that this whole Juneteenth thing happened, you had this connection between Kevin McCarthy and Google emerged. That Kevin McCarthy's close friends, and I think it's an attorney, is representing Google in this against this antitrust, this piece of legislation that Kevin McCarthy noticeably said it's actually too harsh, that it would give regulators too much power against Google. Yeah. So this almost sounds conspiratorial, but I don't think it's a coincidence that basically at the same time the GOP is signaling we actually haven't changed, and we're still going to help the enemies of our voters, they're also saying, look how enlightened we are. We're not racist.
So Pedro, President Biden said yesterday, this is not enough. So what do you think is next?
I think you're going to see more bills that will kind of follow in this spirit, whether they're bills to kneecap the ability of Republicans to win elections. And of course, it'll be framed as Republicans are trying to make elections more secure, right? Well, the Democratic Party is going to frame it as basically you're not living up to the spirit of Juneteenth with these racist, restrictive voting bills. And I think you're going to see more legislation that's going to take us in the direction of basically soft on crime, that we need to actually reduce prison sentences for these really violent offenders, not just people that are involved in burglaries and stuff, but also in much more serious crimes. I think that's already happening. You're going to see the continuation of this whole, we need to defund the police and instead focus on social workers. I think again, Democrats said this specifically on the floor during the debates for this bill. They didn't mince words.
Let me ask you about the point I was making, that I actually think it's a distinct advantage in 2021 America to be a minority. And I think, unfortunately, if anything, anti-white prejudice is largely being normalized in our country. Do you think I'm onto something there?
That's totally right. I think that is, that's part of the reason why I've been such a vocal opposer of this whole thing, because again, regardless of what we want to think and what we want to believe, that is how this is being framed. It's a reminder of how evil America is and how specifically how terrible white people are.
Pedro Gonzalez, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.